Welcome, everyone, to the Philadelphia Watercolor Society presentation by Scott Stevenson. Scott's been in the art industry for 20 years, and he's a key brand ambassador for Daniel Smith, and he's going to tell us all about the mystery behind the minerals and the pigments and the life fastness and all the good details we need to know. You're welcome to put your questions in the chat box below. And if you could please mute your speaker. It looks like everyone's muted. So without further ado, oh, and we have one person from Rome, Italy, Giovanni Bazzarani. Not sure if I said that right. And he's a diehard at 1 a.m. in the morning, or 1:30. So Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you folks today. Special shout out to my friend Giovanni. He is a fellow brand ambassador with me at Daniel Smith, and he's a dear friend and somebody who's definitely very important to our organization. So I'm very happy that he's here to join us today. Well, just once again, to introduce myself, my name is Scott Stevenson. I am a brand ambassador with Daniel Smith. I've been on board with Daniel Smith since 2016. And kind of my role is that I get to work with all of the watercolor societies and retail stores all over North America to be able to talk about all the wonderful things about Daniel Smith. So my art journey actually started quite a while ago, way back in 1996 when my son was a newborn, and back during that time, I was we were a struggling family. I had a newborn, I had a young wife, and we were kind of struggling to get by, and I had 3 jobs. I worked with the Forest Service as a firefighter. My second job was working at Boeing Fire Department in Long Beach, where they made the airplanes. And then my third job, if I had any time left over, was that I would work at a snow ski rental shop on the weekends. So even with all of that going on, my wife still needed some time to sleep. So every once in a while, I would stay up with my son, who was chronically a terrible sleeper when he was young. Imagine that. Who knew that babies did that, right? Anyway, so in the middle of the night when my son would wake up, I would take him in my left arm, and I would have a brush in my right, and I would gently call what I did watercolor. And so even with all that, I had to kind of just figure out a way to stay awake, and watercolor was my way to stay awake, and that was also my introduction to watercolor. So fast forward about 20 years to the year 2000. I went to work for my family business, which is a company that represents Daniel Smith type companies to retailers. Some of them you might know, like Dick Blick or Artisan Craftsman or Plaza Art. So I started representing different manufacturers to those sorts of retailers. So in 2016, Daniel Smith brought me aboard, and it was kind of a funny story because during the time that my son was young, somebody introduced me to Daniel Smith and gave me the color Mayan Blue Genuine, and gave it to me to try. And previous to that, I thought I was living pretty large. I had a $12.99 set of Prang watercolor that I probably got from Target. And when my friend gave me that tube of Daniel Smith watercolor, my mind instantly was blown, because now I was permanently soured on the other paint I was using, because it couldn't do anything close to what that single Daniel Smith color could do. So you can imagine, being a fan all of those years, and fast forward to 2016 when Catherine Taylor, who's the president of Daniel Smith, gives me a call and says, hey Scott, how would you like to join us over at Daniel Smith? And I was like, I was honestly, I thought I was being pranked, because I have funny friends, and what they like to do is we like to play jokes on each other. And I was pretty sure that they got their mom to get on the phone and have a little fun with me. So I was kind of playing along, being a little coy, and suddenly the alarm bells go off in the back of my head that said, "What is this?" And then suddenly I just said, well, it'll be worth it if they laugh at me for a week. So I said, sure, I can start next week. And she laughed and she said, great, can we send you anything to get started? And I was like, yeah, that would be awesome. And then she said, well, what colors do you want me to send you? And I said, well, I need all of them. And she said, she kind of paused for a second and said, well, I'm sure if you work at it, I'm sure you can manage to find a way to get every color we have within a month or so. So then that was it. And that kind of started really a love affair with me with Daniel Smith. I started out as a sales rep, and I started taking care of basically just Northern California. And then as time went on, I started to do more and more. And then I started to do these. I started to do demos for retailers and watercolor societies. And then in 2019, they gave me a great honor and made me a brand ambassador. And for the most part, some of that responsibility included really all over the U.S. So basically, North America, the U.S. and pretty much half of Canada is my responsibility. So so that's a little bit about me. Um, First thing I want to tell you today is that this is really all about you and answering your questions. So please feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat. Beth is going to go ahead and monitor that for me. So so if you have any questions, just feel free to put them there, and we'll get to as many as we can. If we get too far off the rails, I'll definitely be doing my best to get us kind of all reeled back in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just kind of roll through a few things that are pretty important, I think, to discuss when we talk about watercolor. Go ahead and do that. All right, we're sharing. Okay, so it all kind of starts in 1976 for the Daniel Smith Company with this gentleman, Mr. Daniel Smith. He was the founder of our company, and he got his start in art materials at the University of Washington in Seattle, working in the department where they created the school newspaper. And he had worked that job for just a little while, just over a year, when one day him and his colleagues at the printing press were discussing how much they disliked the printmaking ink that they were using, and how cool it would be if somebody would actually make a better ink. So they all kind of went around the room and took their turns saying, yes or no. And everybody had said no until it came to Daniel Smith, where he said, sure, yeah, let me think about that, and let's give it a try. So Dan went ahead and did his very best to find the best black pigment he can find and the best oil-based binder. And then he took it back to his parents' house and actually worked on the batches in his parents' basement. And then when he was finished with the best he could do, he took it back to the school and they put it on the press, and it was much better than what they were using. So then he started to produce ink for the school newspaper. Well, it didn't take long for the school art department to hear about this wonderful black ink that the newspaper was using. And they were wondering if Dan would go ahead and make a batch for them. So Dan went ahead and did that. and brought the ink back. And of course, they loved it. And so much so, they asked them to continue to make it in about 5 or 6 other colors. So Dan went ahead and did that and brought it back. And then suddenly he's starting to see these really, really, really large orders from the school. And he's wondering, what the heck is going on here? He went ahead and looked in the school schedule, the class schedule, to find out, which classes were actually using ink. And he only found like about 3. So it didn't really explain what was happening with the sales of all of this ink and why the school was placing so many orders. So one day he's heading home through the parking lot and he sees a car off in the distance with its trunk open. And there's something shimmering coming from the back of the trunk. And he's like, oh, what is that? So he started to walk closer to the car, and the closer that he got, he immediately recognized what was kind of shining or glimmering. It was actually the cans that he would put his ink in. So students were actually selling the ink out of their trunks in the parking lot of the school. So the light bulb kind of went off for Dan at that point, and he said, "Well, I wonder if I could make it as an ink and paper or a paint maker." So at that point, things were going so well with the ink that he was able to quit his job with the school newspaper and become a full-time paint maker. So fast forward to 1993, after making a few different product lines of oil paint, Dan decides that he really wants to make watercolor, but the problem is that he just didn't really know how to do it. So Dan went and did the one thing that he knew would always work for him, and that was, if you're making an artist product, you got to talk to artists. So Dan went ahead and he traveled abroad to watercolor festivals in Italy, in France, and Asia, and met with a lot of artists and got all of their input with what they think makes a good watercolor. So Dan took all of that knowledge and pulled everything together and made the paint, and then came back the following year to allow these artists to use the paint and see what they thought. So Dan brought it there. The artists absolutely loved it. They started using it in their workshops and their classrooms, literally starting to just kind of percolate, and then it just blew up. And then Dan moved out or created 18 colors. And then in 1998, it allowed him to do something that he's always wanted to do. And he wanted to create something that was going to be very different in the watercolor world. And that was, he wanted to be able to take some of these colors that were in ancient history or ancient civilizations and make them available for artists of today. So I'm going to flip back here and we'll chat more. So here's some early pictures of Dan there at the press. He's the one there sitting, and those are his 2 friends in the background. It's always fun to see. So if you look down here at the bottom of the page where it says ancient peoples, these were the civilizations that Dan was very, very interested in. And what they all have in common was that they all use minerals for pigment to create paint. So for instance, with the Egyptians, they had lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli is actually not mined or sourced from Egypt. It was during that period of time, it was sourced from Afghanistan. But this mineral always had such a prominent, has a prominent history because it was used for a lot of different things. It was used for jewelry, it was used for paint, and it was also used for fabric dye. So this color, lapis lazuli, was always very prominent in Egyptian culture. The Plains Indians had turquoise. And what the Plains Indians would do is they would take the turquoise and they would grind it finely. And then they would mix it with animal fat. And then this became the war paint for their faces and their horses. So another prominent civilization using a mineral. And then the last one I'll mention is Amazonite. Amazonite is another beautiful mineral that comes from South America. But what's really interesting about it is not only did they use it for color, but they also thought it was a healing stone. They used to place the minerals on their sick because they believed that it would help them cure their illness. So Dan was always very, very interested in these minerals because of these ancient civilizations. All right. So one of the big things that we had to figure out as a company was how do we process these minerals in a way that that made sense. The methods that these ancient civilizations had were very primitive, and from a real 21st century point of view, didn't make a lot of sense because you couldn't produce enough of it fast enough. So Dan had to figure out a different process that would allow him to process these minerals down to the proper size so that it could be used for watercolor. So what we call the process is we call that process Primatech, which is short for primitive technology. And what you see here, this is kind of what it looks like from 30,000 feet, but we'll definitely get into some more detail here. It all starts with this gentleman here by the name of Bruce. And Bruce is our full-time mineralogist. So Bruce has a really important job. He gets to travel all over the world and visit our mine owners. And when Bruce goes and visits with these mine owners, he has a couple things that he has to think about. The first thing that Bruce has to think about is that whatever he decides to buy, we have to be able to maintain it with at least a 15-year supply. So why do you all think we need to have that much product available to us at all time? You can have the chat. Well, the first thing that we have to consider is consistency of color. So for instance, if depending upon the mine you're in, the deposit or the ore that we're able to buy from, the bigger the piece, the better, because that helps us to maintain consistency of color. The second one is very important today. Anybody notice how much a gallon of milk costs today versus a couple of years ago? Yeah, it's called inflation. So when you buy that much mineral at one time, it helps to keep your costs flat. And then lastly, another important factor for us is supply, to be able to stay in stock, to make sure that we always have a steady stream of product for you, our artists, to buy. This was especially helpful to us when we went through COVID, and when there were all of those supply chain issues. We didn't really experience any of that except for kind of the shutdown of our factory because of the fact that we were locked down. So we have 15 years worth of everything we need in order to make paint. So that's 15 years of mineral, 15 years of pigment, that's 15 years of gum arabic, 15 years of even tubes. So we literally have 5-gallon buckets, floor to ceiling, piled up with converted mineral. And we have pallets and pallets and pallets of actual tubes. So so it's really important for us to be able to maintain that so that we can write out whatever really the economy has for us.
So Scott, is French ultramarine becoming scarce, or is there any pigment that is going to become scarce in your
Well,
mind?
I think you're probably talking about lapis lazuli, which was the original. It was the original ultramarine, and lapis. We get our lapis the majority of the time now from Chile, and they're starting to talk about that one day lapis lazuli as a color will eventually disappear. Your question is about ultramarine, and ultramarine is a synthetic pigment, and that color is very secure at this point. We're not really worried about any outages at this point, so we're in good shape with French and ultramarine.
Mhm. Okay, thanks.
Mhm. Okay. All right. So when we're ready to make a batch of paint using a mineral, what we do is we go over to the mineral and we break off a piece of that basically boulder-sized mineral and put it into what we call a jaw mill. So that jaw mill is what you see down there in the bottom left. And what that does is that for certain types of mineral, when you put it into that machine, it causes the machine to put gentle pressure on the mineral and causes it to break into pieces that are about this size. So about the size of a watermelon, or excuse me, about the size of your fist, about the size of a softball. So, and from that watermelon size piece, we'll probably get about 8 to 10 of these. And then we move it along to the next part of the process, which is what we call a hammer mill. And it's what that looks like up there. So basically what it is it's a spinning machine or a machine that has a spinning blade, and it helps us to remove the part of the mineral that we can't use. So for instance, when we look at this piece of raw lapis lazuli, can you see all of the gray right here?
Yes.
This is all product that we can't use, so we have to figure out a way to remove that. So one of the ways that we can do that is we use that hammer mill, and that hammer mill gently removes all of the gray in here, or the part of the mineral that we don't want, and it leaves us with the mineral that we do. So after that, after we go through that machine, now we're talking about pieces that are this size. And we'll probably get about maybe about 6 or 7 pieces this size out of that softball size mineral that you saw earlier. So the next part here is really kind of where where I think the miracle in our process is, and it involves using what we call a ball mill. And this ball mill is a spinning cylinder, and in the middle of it, in the inside, it has about 1,000 or so ball bearings. And you drop the mineral in the sides, and the mineral tumbles against all of those ball bearings and causes this to break down into something that is really, 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 really tiny. Basically, it breaks it down into what we call 40 microns. So 40 microns is a very small unit of measure. A 40 microns is the smallest actually our eye can actually pick up with perfect vision. So 40 microns, just to put it another way to put it in perspective, is about half the thickness of a human hair. Yeah, and a sheet of just 20-pound copy paper is 100 microns. So what's really incredible is that even though we break the mineral down so small, we don't lose what's interesting and valuable about the mineral. So that could be that could be the beautiful granulation that you see here with green apatite, or the shimmer that you see with burnt bronzite. See if I can get it to shimmer a little bit here in the light. You can see it a little bit. Cameras usually don't like this too much. So the whole key is that we just can't put our minerals on a grinder and make them small. We have to use this process because this process helps us get the mineral to the proper size without going overboard and ruining the mineral. So it's a really cool process to be able to take these beautiful minerals and colors that were so prominent in our past and make them available for artists of today. All right, I don't see any questions in the chat.
Do you have any questions?
All right. Okay, so now that we have the mineral down to the size that we want, we go to the next part of the process.
Before
Beth,
you get to the
my
next part,
Beth,
could you raise the mineral up a little bit more so people could see the bottom, the
sure.
label on the bottom? Yeah, could you raise it a little more? There you go.
There we go. I'm
So
trying.
is that like a burnt sienna, or what do you call that?
This one is burnt bronzite.
Beautiful.
Yeah. There we go.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. All right. Let's dive back in.
We do have a question. Are your paints all made at one factory? And is that in Seattle?
Yeah, we do everything in Seattle, even to this day. So we actually have two facilities. We have one facility that breaks down the mineral, and then the other one that actually does the paint making process. So basically what we just finished talking about, how the mineral was breaking down, that ends the process in one facility, and then it gets transported to the other for the actual making of the paint. All right, so now that we have the mineral down to the size that we want it, we bring all three of our ingredients together. So we only have three. So we have the mineral or the pigment, gum arabic, and distilled water. Does anybody know where gum arabic comes from?
From you with the paint in it.
So gum arabic actually comes from Michelle. Yes, thank you. It comes from trees. It's actually a sap from the acacia tree.
Hmm.
And gum arabic is actually used for a lot of different things. It's used in food, of course. It's also used as a binder for watercolors specifically. So, and it's like we mentioned, it's a sap. So it has a natural kind of stickiness to it, which is great because we want it to basically hold our ingredients together. Yeah. Yep. A tree in Africa. You got it, Jeffrey. So basically, there's two different spots in the world where gum arabic comes from. It comes from either the Sudan or Indonesia. So at the moment, there's a lot of problems in the Sudan. So a lot of the gum arabic production in the world has moved to Indonesia. So, but what's really cool about the acacia tree is they have to let these trees mature to a certain age, to 10 years of age, actually, before they can harvest the sap. Otherwise, they'll kill the tree. So very, very interesting. Let me ask you all this. Why would we use distilled water instead of tap water? What's in tap water that we may not want?
A lot of things we don't want to drink. We
That's
don't
right.
want to bleach our paint out.
Impurities. Yeah, you're right, Carol. Yeah, fluoride, chlorine. Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. For sure. So these are all things that exist in tap water that we don't want to bring to our basically our mixture of paint, our formulation of paint. But it's not for the reason that you think. All of those things that we mentioned, the fluoride, the calcium, and all of that, doesn't really have an impact on the longevity of the color. For us, what it has to do is with continuity of the process and making sure that our process, that we're able to repeat the process batch after batch after batch. So so we choose to use distilled water because none of those impurities or what we call or things that we call variables in our process, we really try to weed those out. So using distilled water is a way for us to make sure that we get to the same results every time. Now, there's also a benefit in terms of brightness that I think is worth talking about. And that when you have all of those other impurities in the water and when you use it with your paint, it looks a little, when you compare using distilled water versus tap water, there is a little bit of a difference. So what I would invite you all to do is go ahead and get a cup of distilled water and a cup of tap water and see if you can spot the difference. So for us, those are the only three ingredients that we have in our paint. So we put those three things in those vessels that you see at the top, and the smallest one that you see there is 5 gallons. The largest one actually is about 500 gallons. So had to do a little shrinking to get it into the picture. So after we have it in those vessels, we take it to the mixing station, and this is where we blend all of the ingredients together. What it does is it has a really high-speed motor that churns the paint at a high rate of speed and creates what's called a Venturi effect. And that Venturi effect, what it does is if you think about a smoothie for a moment, and what happens. So when you turn the blender on, you instantly see your smoothie rise, and that's because you're injecting oxygen into your smoothie, and that's what makes it rise. Same thing happens when you make paint using this method. So you churn the paint at a high rate of speed, and it injects all sorts of air into the mixture of the paint. So much so that it changes the texture to something that's closer to like heavy whipped cream. So not exactly ideal from this point to go ahead and put it in a tube and let everybody use it. So the other thing that happens that's also something that we solve later on is that the paint, when you inject air into the paint, it creates what we call agglomerates, or basically clumps of pigment particles, and they kind of overlap and clump with each other. And we have to figure out a way to break those up so that the gum arabic can get in between all of those little paint particles. If we left them in place, so like if you see that picture on the bottom left, if you were to take your brush and put it into the bucket of paint there and do a stroke, what you would notice is some parts would be fine, but then there would be other parts that would have almost a pastel look to it, and that's because those particles are tangled. So we have to kind of figure out how we solve that, and the way we do that is that we use what's called a dispersion mill, or a 3-roll mill. So this piece of equipment here is literally what every paint manufacturer in the world uses in order to mill paint and make it the right texture. So the way that it works is that it has 3 cylinders, and they're all spinning in opposite directions of each other. So cylinder number 1 is spinning clockwise. Cylinder number 2 is spinning counterclockwise, and then number 3 is clockwise again. So the paint comes up and over the top and then hits the second cylinder. And what ends up happening is that because the second cylinder is spinning at the same speed as the first one, it creates a tearing effect, which rips those paint particles apart so that the gum arabic can get in between each of those paint particles or pigment particles. And then the same thing happens again when it comes to cylinder number 3. So cylinder number 3, once again, is now spinning clockwise, and it's that whole thing is happening all over again. So so at the end of the day here, what happens is that it pulls the pigment particles apart. So each of the gum arabic particles can encapsulate all of the pigment.
So Jeffrey had a question.
Yep.
Do synthetic colors require grinding? And he makes a note that cobalt violet has a lot of granulation. And so what's the process for the synthetic colors?
Basically, there's two things that happen. So when we talk about the synthetic colors, basically what happens is that what we do is we buy pigment in the largest possible chunk that we can, and that gives us all sorts of abilities to make the color granulate or not granulate. That's kind of one of our talents, is the chemistry part of this, where we can, even though a color is a synthetic, depending upon the size of the particle, we can make it granulate or not granulate. So if we chose to make cobalt violet not granulate, we absolutely could. And we would, when we got to the mill, the 3-roll mill, we would actually run it on the machine a little bit longer so that we can break down those pigment particles a little bit smaller. So, but the fact that cobalt violet granulates is not by mistake.
Mm-hmm. So the synthetic colors are produced the same way in the same process?
Yeah, with the exception that the synthetic pigment is already broken down, and we don't have to break that down any further until we get to the 3-roll mill, and that's the point where we can decide whether colors will granulate or not granulate. All right. Okay, so here's a little look at what that machine looks like. So basically, this is where the paint comes out, and it's loaded on the far end. So if you see all 3 cylinders there, so the process actually starts in the back of the machine. And then at the end here, this little triangular piece, we call that the apron, and that's where the paint comes out. And there's usually a 5-gallon bucket that sits down below there and catches all the paint as it comes out. This gentleman here, you can see he's actually on the front end, and then the gentleman in the back there, he has another one of these where he is catching the paint on the back end. All right, so the only piece of real automation that we have in our factory is our tube filling station. So the way this machine works is that it has a carousel in front of it, and the tubes are, when it comes in, the tubes are upside down, so that they are upside down like this. And just imagine this crimp is open. And what ends up happening is the machine has like a tube that injects the right amount of paint into the tube. It crimps it, and then it sends it out where a human is there to get it and actually stamp a number on the crimp of the tube. And this batch number is really, really important, because we archive every single batch of paint we make, and we've done so going all the way back to batch number 1 in 1993. So, and the way it all kind of works is that batch number will correspond to one of these, which is internally we call these paint outs. But for us in the factory, it actually serves more like a recipe card. So we'll have one of these, and then on the back, it'll have basically all of the information that's needed to make the color. So that's precisely how much pigment, how much gum arabic, how much water. All of that information goes here, as well as everybody who had a hand in making the paint. So every machine operator, the chemist that was working that day, We even put down things like what the weather was, what was the temperature, what was the humidity, anything and everything that could help us figure out if it help us figure out a problem if we ever had one. So, and what makes this important to you as an artist, let's say you have a tube of tiger's eye and you went through it and you went and bought another tube and you started using it and you noticed a difference in the two colors. Well, what you could do is you could call Daniel Smith, give them the two batch numbers, and then Daniel Smith will pull the paint outs and put them side by side and tell you one of two things. They could tell you, hey, Scott, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We're gonna do some investigation here, and we'll get back to you. But 99% of the time, the conversation usually goes like this. Hey, Scott, thank you for giving us a call and letting us know about this potential problem. But did you happen to have was your brush happen to be clean when you started to use this color, or was your water clean? Because we definitely don't see a problem. So at that point you go, maybe. Anyway, so we have all of that information for artists. If you ever have a question about the paint that it sells, you're always free to call Daniel Smith customer service, and they're a wealth of knowledge there if you ever have a question.
So we have two interesting questions.
All right.
First one is, does each pigment have its own production line, or do you run multiple pigments through the same line after a thorough cleaning?
Well, we only have 3 lines in our entire factory. So we are a very, very, very small operation. So generally speaking, when we do a production run, it's continuous and until the batch is made. So, and then in between, when we're done with it, we actually have to steam clean all of the equipment so that we don't have any color contamination.
Makes sense. And then the second question here is, the color variations, are they based on a few of the primary pigments, red, yellow, and blue? And do you have distinct primary colors that you recommend?
That are cool or warm?
Red, a pyrrole red versus a rose madder, or your warm red.
That'll be a good question when we get to the color charts. I think some of that will make a lot of sense when we get there.
Okay.
We can handle the others.
Let's see here. What is the difference between a pigment and a paint? And do some paints have 2 or more pigments?
Absolutely. There are a number of colors in our line that utilize 2 or more pigments. We actually have one color that actually utilizes 6 pigments.
So, pastels concern me because of handling the pigment. So how do you safely handle the pigment with hazardous minerals such as the cadmiums and the cobalts?
That's a great question, Janet. So basically the way that we do that is we've gradually started to move away from pigments that are not safe. Not only safe for artists, but also not safe for our people to work with. So because of that, we don't use real cadmiums in our line anymore. We actually don't use manganese in our line anymore. We still use cobalts, but the interesting thing about cobalts is that because of the dilution factor with watercolor, cobalts aren't nearly as unsafe to work with as, say, cadmiums are. But I do see a day when, as an industry, cobalts will be moved out, and And because of the advancement in synthetic pigments that are safe, I think that they'll just be continued to be moved out and copied and made into hues, just like our cadmium hues are in our line.
Mhm. So we have one more question here. Why do some paints saturate easily and versus others harden? They use the example Potter's Pink. I don't have that color myself.
Yeah, Potter's Pink is not in my palette, but you know, within every line of paint, there's colors that have different qualities to them, and some of them react better over time than others. So to kind of think about that and how certain colors are either more gummy or more sticky. It all has to do with the innate characteristics of the pigment itself. Since we choose to really only use 3 ingredients to our paint, as kind of more of a purist approach, it does allow the nature of the pigments to be more prominent. And sometimes that's good. That has, you know, there are great things about that. And sometimes there are some, you know, warts that kind of come through that some people may not like. So I definitely understand about Potter's Pink. It's not one of my favorite colors either.
Is it a fugitive color or?
Potter's Pink, no, Potter's Pink is not fugitive. So it's light fast. I believe we would classify it as a 2, which means it's probably light fast to 100 years.
Okay, and before you move on, one of my favorite colors, quinacridone gold. Janet asks, are we running out of this pigment? Because we all need to buy a tube then.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite too. I call quinacridone gold secret sauce, because it doesn't matter what I blend it with; it makes anything good. So I would definitely be heartbroken if that color ever goes away. So so the answer to the question about quinacridone gold is we are in really good shape with that color for quite a long time. So I believe we have in excess of 20 years worth of product left. John Cogley, who's the current owner of Daniel Smith, he does a really good job of finding these pockets all over the world where people have pigment stashed, and he goes and buys the last remaining stocks of these. So, and he's done that with all of our quinacridone colors. If you look at some of the other paint manufacturers in the world, you know, like Golden, they had to discontinue all their quinacridone colors because they didn't have a source anymore. So fortunately for us, we found all sorts of reserves all over the world. We bought them all up, and because of that, we're going to have them for the next 20 years or so.
Thank you. Thank you, John,
Yes.
for buying all that stash.
Yeah, he's really good at it. He's really good at it. Okay. Let's head back here. So, you know, we were talking about light fastness just a second ago with Potter's Pink. So this is a good opportunity to talk about how we go ahead and figure out the light fastness ratings of all of our colors. So basically what we use is a machine called a xenon phaedometer. And what this machine does is it helps us to accurately determine how colors will react when exposed to ultraviolet light. So that little cutout there, I don't know how well you all can see that, but on the inside of that machine, there's a carousel, and in that carousel, we put our paint outs. So these guys. And that machine is about the size of a large industrial refrigerator. So imagine, you know, an 8-foot table by about 4 feet deep. And it has that carousel in it. And then in the middle of that carousel, there's a rod that comes down that has a bulb that projects a very, very, very bright amount of light. basically that light bulb produces enough light so that it can replicate light exposure over 120 years in just 4 days. So it is so bright that if they didn't put distilled water down the center of that bulb, that whole machine would actually just melt to the ground. It gets that hot, and that light is that bright. Basically, the light that it replicates is what we have on a cloudless day at noon, and it's able to replicate that 120 years of that in 4 days. So it's pretty remarkable.
That is amazing.
Yeah. And at the end of the 4 days, they take the paintouts out and then they'll put them next to a template. And then based upon the amount of fade that they see, they're able to assign it a number, which will correlate with our color chart.
Does the
So
binder affect the light fastness of the pigment?
does the, I'm sorry,
Binder, the gum arabic?
no, the gum arabic is actually very neutral.
Okay, because other manufacturers use Aquasol, and they
Mhm.
claim that their light fastness is more reliable over 100 years in their testing. I don't know, are you familiar with Aquasol?
Yeah, I am. I haven't had a lot of experience with it, so I haven't really verified that myself, but I
Okay.
have heard of it. There's advantages to both. I've also heard with Aquasol that it doesn't re-wet as well as gum arabic does. So it's you really pick your poison when you want to hit certain types of characteristics. So, and you try to hit as many of the qualities that you want as best you can. And for us, gum arabic allows us to do that.
Can you make that chart any bigger on the bottom? I can't really read the names. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's nice. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. There we go. All right. Here's another look at a more life-size view of what the inside of that machine looks like. All right. Photospectrometer. So this machine helps us to determine or help us to keep consistency from batch to batch. So the way that it works is that you take a little piece of that cutout, and then that black arm that you see right there in the middle of the machine, you pull that forward and there's a window there, and you put a little piece of that cutout in the window. And what it actually does is it shines a light onto the surface of the pigment, and then the pigment reflects light back to the machine, and the machine measures or assigns a value to it. So, and this is kind of how we make sure that our batches are consistent. So let's say, for example, we have burnt bronzite, for example, and it comes out at a 75. So every batch has to come out at either 74, 75, or 76. If it doesn't fall within that range, the entire batch is scrapped, and we will not tube it or anything. It ends up being destroyed. So we're sticklers about making sure that we're consistent from batch to batch, so that there's not big color variation. All right, let's talk about granulation for a moment. So granulation, for those of you who don't know, is this textured look. And the reason why this happens is that the particles are, while they may be 40 micron, but they may be in different sizes. And when you have the variation in sizes, it creates a textured look when you have a paper that has tooth. So when you have those variation or weight in the size of the pigment particles, they want to settle into the tooth of the paper, while the gum arabic and distilled water floats to the top. So when you have that scenario, that's when you get what we call granulation. And for me, granulation, I love it because one of the things that I really struggled with in the beginning was detail. Detail for me was really kind of a tough thing, and especially like when we were talking about trees and things like that, because I would absolutely obsess over the leaves and the branches, and over time, it really was frustrating to me. And then I was introduced to colors that granulate, and it really changed the way that I viewed things. It helped me to make things look more natural without making it look overdone. Um, the other thing I think it does too is it does a much better job of replicating what nature can do than I can with a brush or a pen. So it really kind of changed the way that I looked at things in terms of my perspective. Um, now that I know how to use colors that granulate, I don't have to worry about the things I'm not good at. And granulation really helps me with that.
I think that's the color that Thomas Schaller uses for his trees.
Yeah,
Granulate, genuine.
Thomas Schaller is one of my heroes. I hope to meet him one day. I would probably faint when I saw him.
I,
He is
he's amazing.
He is amazing. You know, I think that there are some amazing real artists who do realism just unbelievably well, and I think between him and Joseph Zavuvic, those are two of. I think we're really lucky that that we get to continue to see new work from both of them and enjoy their work. They're absolutely amazing.
So before you start, Michael Adams has a question, and he states that ultramarine is one of his favorite granulated colors. And what other colors do you have that are super granulated?
Oh my gosh, where to start?
Oh,
There's lots. I'll show you a few here. This is one of my favorites. It's kind of a cooler green. This is zoisite.
hmm.
Another cool one is bloodstone. And then as far as a blue is concerned, there's also blue apatite. So those are some of my favorite granulating colors. All right, Sleeping Beauty turquoise. Yes, Michelle, that's another beautiful granulating color. All right, I'm gonna jump back in here. All right. All right, let's talk about quinacridone. So quinacridone, that word, describes a particular type of color family. So just like quinacridone is a color family, so are colors like perylines and pyrols. And what that means is that the colors that are within those families, like pyrrole crimson, quinacridone gold, all of those, the first name of the color describes the family that it's from. And each family, just like our families, have different DNA. So let's talk about what quinacridone actually means. So what does quin mean in Latin? Anybody? 5. Very good, Carol. So quin in Latin means 5, and cridone in Latin means rings. So 5 rings. So if you look at the diagram here where it says quinacridone, I'm going to zoom in on it. You look up here at the top, right underneath the word quinacridone, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 rings. So that's where that word comes from. It was actually discovered by a German chemist who likely didn't know what he had. And it got lost for quite a few years until the late 1950s, when the DuPont Corporation created the first quinacridone color for a car manufacturer. Does anybody know what car manufacturer that was?
Ford?
No, it was actually a Japanese company.
1950s.
It was
GM? Michelle says GM.
Nope, it was actually Toyota. And the first color that Toyota ordered was quinacridone gold.
Toyota.
Those of us, I'm sure most of us remember that the gold cars in the late 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even into the 80s, wasn't that real high chroma, shiny gold. It was more of a muted gold. So, and quinacridone gold was the first quinacridone color to actually be used in automotive. So the automotive industry has a very big hand, even today, in the colors that we use as artists. So, so quinacridone. So it was discovered in the late 1800s, but really they were made popular in automotive. And then Daniel Smith was the first manufacturer to actually use quinacridone colors in watercolor. So what's really wonderful about these is that they're all very transparent colors, so they're very easy to blend with and make beautiful mixes. They're great for washes, and really have a big variety or a big swing in color. You have colors that go all the way from a very bright orange all the way to colors that have a lot of purple in it. So the other big question that I get asked all the time is, how do they do that? How do they make this be such a big swing? And the answer to that is actually back in that diagram that I showed you here. If you look here and you see these little lines, they're able to move, chemists are able to move these lines all over the rings. And when that happens, it changes the way that light refracts through the pigment. And when you refract light, it changes the way that our eye interprets the color. So the question I always get is, well, can't there be a quinacridone green or a quinacridone blue? And honestly, the answer to that question is yes, they absolutely can. It just takes a big pigment customer to ask for it. So, but quinacridone pigments are really amazing. Those of you that are interested in actually knowing what it's made from, we actually show you the formula right here where it says chemical formula. What's really cool is it's all things that you've heard of before. It's carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen in those particular quantities and under a lot of heat creates the quinacridone pigment. I'm going to go ahead and get out of this because I want to show you something. Do you folks see any granulation here at all?
I don't.
Yep. Nope. You all are correct. So what's happening here is that those particles, those rings that we talked about, they're all the same size, the same shape, and the same weight. So they're all exactly the same. So if you imagine a jigsaw puzzle for a moment, what would it look like if all of those pieces were exactly the same? What would end up happening is that because those pieces are so much the same, that they would overlap in a way that is very seamless, and that is the reason why we don't get a lot of granulation. The granulation that you might see here, by the way, actually might be because the artist who created these might have been a little heavy, especially up here at the top where she started.
So what kind of paper, Jeff asks, what kind of paper is that on, those test
Yeah,
samples?
we do all of our testing on a paper called Lana or Lana. It's very hard to find here in the US, but it's very prominent in Europe. And the reason why we use it is that we have not been able to find a better manufacturer where the sizing has been as consistent as Lana's has been.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Moving along. Okay, make this smaller again. There we go. All right, particle size. So what we're talking about there is, we talked briefly about ultramarine blue and French ultra. So one of the interesting things about those colors is that when you look at them on a color chart, they are all exactly the same. I'm looking for my paint outs here. Oops. Looks like those are missing in action. So we can still talk through it. So basically the difference between French ultramarine and ultramarine is the particle size of the pigment. So when you look at our French ultra, for example, our French ultra is more granulated than the ultra, and there's a reason for that. Even though they're the exact same pigment, they're milled to a different size in order to give different effects. So the French ultra, because of the size of the particle, it shows more granulation versus the ultra. So the difference between the French and the ultra is 10 microns for the French ultra, which makes it a little bit bigger, and then 6 microns for the ultramarine. So, and when you have that, the colors, because of the size of the particles, the French will look a little bit warmer versus the ultra that will look a little bit cooler. And because the reason for that is that because the difference in the sizes, the light reacts differently when the particles are bigger or smaller. All right. So here's kind of a look at our whole line of quinacridone colors. So these are all of them. So these, we have more in our line than anybody else. John, our owner, is really, you want to make John, our owner, really happy. Giovanni knows this too, is that you start talking to him about quinacridone colors and all the fun things to know about them. But quinacridone colors are definitely something that we're known for.
Yeah, they're beautiful, juicy.
Yep, very juicy, very lush, and also very extremely light fast too. Some of these colors are so light fast that that xenon phaedometer can't accurately tell you how light fast they even are, because they're so far off the end. Okay. All right, any questions before I move on to the color chart? All right. Okay, so one of the big things that I think is really important to understand is really how our color chart works, and it's a really great tool as an artist to be able to understand the characteristics of the pigments that you work with. So we have color charts that are available for everyone. If anybody would like to have a hard copy color chart, please just send Beth an email or put your address in the chat, and she'll relay that to me, and I would be happy to put color charts in the mail for anybody who would want them.
Thank you.
Yep.
Make a
All right.
note.
So just kind of walk you through our color chart. So on the big page, when you get your color chart and you open it up, and when you open it up to the big part, this is kind of what you'll see. So you'll see that our color chart is laid out chromatically. And I'm just going to walk you through here. So this represents some of our synthetic colors. Same thing here. And then same thing here. And then when you look at the back of our color chart, it has an area that is specifically just for our Primatech colors. So if you remember correctly, any color that is a Primatech color is a mineral. So that you'll find those on the back side of the color chart. Down below the Primatech colors, you will find our range of luminescent colors. So this includes colors that what we would call duochrome, iridescent, and interference colors. So all of those comprise our luminescent colors. Just to kind of stop here for a moment, I get lots of questions about what is a duochrome color. So duochrome, what that means, that duo, it means that that particular color is going to bounce between two different colors. So the color that I'm showing you here is duochrome saguaro green. And what you can see is that when you put it just on white paper, it has a brown tone to it. But when you use it on a black background, either with watercolor ground or, or say, you could use a gesso also, is that you see something completely different. You almost see like a jade, like a metallic green. So, and the way that happens is that this color has mica in it, and the mica is oxidized in a certain way that when it's exposed to light, it bends light in a different way so that our eyes interpret a different color. All right. That's a duochrome color. The other questions I get a lot is, what's the difference between an iridescent and interference pigments? So iridescent colors, they use a mica, and the mica is shaped in such a way that it reflects light like a mirror. So the particle light hits the paint pigment matrix, and it bounces it back basically in a straight line. So kind of like a mirror. Interference colors use refraction. So what ends up happening there is that the mica is shaped similarly to the way that a diamond would be shaped, where it has different facets and things like that. So if you imagine like a diamond ring that has lots of facets to it, it sparkles, right? And that's because the facets in the diamond are reflecting certain things. Or if you also want to think about the way that a crystal would work, and the way that if you change the angle on a crystal, it changes the way that your eye interprets the color. So what ends up happening is light enters in through the mica, and then hits the substrate, whether the paper is white or black. If the color is white, what's interesting is that the light does not get sent back through the mica. That's why when you look at interference colors out of the tube, most of the time they're like a white milky color. And when you put them on white paper, you don't see anything really impressive at all. However, when you use a black background or black watercolor ground, that light ends up being reflected back through the mica with all of the facets, and it causes a scattering of the light because the light is being shot through the different facets in the mica. So when that happens, that's how we get interference colors. So the question that I get a lot is with interference colors, well, how do you use them then? There's not a lot of us that like to use black watercolor paper. But really the best way to use interference colors, or even some iridescent colors, is to mix them with colors that don't have those characteristics. It really gives them kind of a different look, a different feel, a different effect. So they're kind of fun to be able to use in kind of an additive sort of way to create a specific or a certain desired effect.
So we have a question here. Mike
Yep.
asks, are luminescent colors considered more opaque than transparent?
Yeah, I think that's an accurate statement. I believe they to be a little bit more opaque, just because of the nature of, or I should say the uniqueness of the pigments, or the characteristic of the pigments. They tend to be more opaque than transparent. There's one color that is not that way, and it's a color called pearlescent shimmer, and it's really fun because it can be put over the top of literally anything, and it doesn't shift the color underneath, but it leaves behind a beautiful shimmer, as kind of, if you wanted to use it to say add moisture to a leaf, or due to a leaf, where you want to do that. Or if you have a portrait, and you want to draw people to say the eyes, you could put a little bit of pearlescent shimmer to the eyes, and you get this beautiful shimmer that really draws your attention.
That sounds great.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how do we read the color chart? So basically, we give you a lot of information here. The first thing that you'll see, and you'll find this legend at the top of the color chart when you all receive them, it'll have all of this information. So the first thing here is that where it says color information, we're telling you that all of the information moves from left to right. So all the information that you see will start from the left and finish to the right. The next piece of info is what the particular color is available in. So basically, we have basically 4 different formats. We have a 15 mil tube, a 5 mil tube, a watercolor stick, and a half pan. So here's kind of what they look like all side by side. I get a lot of questions about, what is a watercolor stick, and why should I want it? Basically, just to understand it a little bit, and to kind of help you understand better what it is and what it isn't. Basically, you think about it as a concentrated stick of watercolor that is dry. So have any of you ever traveled with tubes of paint on an airplane? It's not a lot of fun, right? You get to where you're going, and you take that cap off the top of the paint, and then suddenly it kind of squirts all over you. So you're like, great, there goes $10 of paint. So what's really nice about these watercolor sticks is that they're dry, and they're very, very portable. What they're made from is the pigment and the gum arabic, and that's it. So they don't have any wax with them, associated with them. The gum arabic, just kind of on its own, kind of has a stickiness to it, and there is a little bit of a stickiness to these watercolor sticks, but it's kind of a good thing in a way that it really keeps the sticks, and they actually travel really well together. They're when they come out of a machine, we put them in a kiln for a few minutes so that they're not really terribly sticky. And that they're just more kind of a dry stick. So the big question is, how do we use them? There's lots of different ways to use them. One way is that you can take the watercolor sticks, and you can either scrape them into your palette. You can I saw one of the most creative things I saw was that people would cut up their sticks and then put them in an Altoid tin, kind of get the bottom wet so they stick, And then they had these neat little things of paint that were there. But the way that I really like to use them, and I think the way that they actually work the best, is to actually take a brush and then pull the paint directly from the sticks, and then move to your paper. And um, one of the things I really like to do when I use these is that I'll put the sticks between my fingers like that,
Huh.
and then I'll just paint from here. And what's really kind of fun is that you can blend on the tops of these colors and not ruin the sticks. They won't contaminate. And when you're done, all you do is you just wipe off the tops of the sticks and put them back in your in your holder or your storage device, and you're done.
Do they
Uh,
come in a
do they come in what?
tube or something? Or is it just like a crayon? It just has paper?
Yeah, it's I would caution you against using it as a drawing material. It doesn't really operate well that way. It has, like I mentioned, it doesn't have any wax in it to make it glide. So what tends to happen is that when you use it as a drawing material, it tends to want to leave a little bit of ghosting. Now, there's ways around it. You could just put your stick directly into a cup of water and go that way, and that helps. But I really believe the best way to use these is to really go from brush to stick to paper.
What is that you have in your hand?
So we have sets of watercolor sticks, and actually Giovanni, our my good friend from Italy, he had a big hand in making one of these sets. It's our primary set, and he uses watercolor sticks a lot. And what we have with these sets is that they come in these holders, and these sets actually come with these holders. So it's very these are very useful storage devices.
Yes, that looks handy. Now, I
Mhm.
like that. I like that holder.
Yeah, and the other really interesting thing too is that say you didn't buy in a set, each stick actually has the same price point, so it doesn't matter which color you choose. There's no series; they're all the same price. And each stick retails for a little under $16, but essentially you get the same amount of paint as 15 mil tube. So they're really a great value. All right, heading back here. All right. All right, and lastly, we have half pans. So our half pans, it's a 3-step process. So that helps us to get the highest pigment load that we can when we use that process, when we use 3 different pours.
So, Scott, before you move on, the quinacridone tubes don't have the light fastness on them, so you almost need the chart to go with the tube, right?
That's correct. The labeling requirements here in the US continue to get more and more stringent. So those labels are going to continue to get smaller, smaller, and smaller, which means we have lesser amount of information that we can actually put on the tubes anymore. So having a color chart is extremely important and valuable, so that you can understand all of the properties of the colors that you're using.
Yeah, and I think you were going to point out what you consider in the factor, your warm red, your cool, your primary warm red, your primary cool red,
Mhm.
and yellow and blue. What do you think?
What I really recommend folks to do is to look at our essentials set. If you are looking for, as a gift for somebody who's trying to get it into Daniel Smith watercolor, we have a very specific set that we have that has all of those colors. It has, let me find it here real quick. Basically, it has pyrrole red, ultramarine blue, Hansa yellow light, And there might be a purple in there. But if we're looking at the color chart, if you're asking me what colors, that I would suggest, let me come on back here. We'll go back into the color chart and I'll show you. No, that's not it.
I'd like to have a limited palette, but I just can't help myself. One more color.
Yeah, I'm afraid we're not going to be able to help you in that regard. All right, let me just move back here for a little bit and I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about in terms of some of the colors. So in terms of like a yellow, a cool yellow, I'm kind of a fan of Hansa Yellow Light. In terms of a warmer yellow, I would look at Hansa Yellow Medium. Would be probably my warm yellow. For red, reds are difficult for me because I just have a tough time figuring out, do I like more like, blue reds? Do I like more like warm reds, like, that are more orangey? So the reds that I tend to gravitate towards are like anthracanoid red. Here's one. For more of an orangey or warmer oranger red, I prefer pyrrole scarlet, and then anthracanoid red be kind of my cooler red. In terms of, move away from that, go to the next page. Oops. Sorry about that, folks. Giving everybody whiplash. There we go. For blues, my core blue I would recommend would be ultramarine blue. And then for something that was a really unique blue, I would say Mayan blue in the Primatech colors. Greens. I think one of the interesting thing about greens is I prefer granulating greens. So I'm looking at the green apatite in the Primatech collection, but I'm also very much, I really love undersea green here. And then if we're talking about kind of yellow ochreish colors, quinacridone gold is my standby. And then the more we get to more of the orangey reds, quinacridone burnt orange is another favorite. Oops, keep doing that. All right, let me just move back here. All right, okay, back to the color chart. So the next piece of information that we give you is the light fastness rating on the colors. So we use a Roman numeral system, a 1 through 4. So any color of ours that gets a 1, that means that color is light fast beyond 100 years. 2 is very good, that's 100 years. 3 is fair, which is 50 to 70, and any color for us that's 15 to 20 years is a color that we deem to be fugitive. So I know there was a question about that earlier. I saw opera pink pop up. So we have 2 colors in our line that are fugitive. Opera pink is probably the most obvious, but there's another one that's not as obvious that a lot of people may not know is fugitive. Does anybody want to take a shot at it? How about alizarin crimson? Alizarin crimson is a fugitive color, which was kind of a shocker to me because every artist or teacher that I worked with suggested that I have alizarin crimson. And all these years later, I'm still kind of disappointed that my instructor or instructors would choose to tell me to use a color that was fugitive. Kind of strange.
But is it fugitive if it's called permanent alizarin crimson?
No, and thank you for making that distinction. So there's a couple of colors where you might see something that says permanent. So permanent alizarin crimson is made from two different pigments that are light fast, and we've just synthesized them to make them as close to the original single pigment version of alizarin crimson that is fugitive. So anything that you say is that you see as permanent has been synthesized to be as close as possible to the original color, but is light fast.
Great.
All right. The next piece of information is whether the color is staining, non-staining, or staining. So here's kind of a good way to look at this. So if you look at cobalt violet there at the top, you see that we've given it a 1, so it's a non-staining color. So what this has to do with is how easily can you lift certain colors, and depending upon which color it is, they have different abilities to lift or not lift. So you see cobalt violet here at the top, which is a 1. And if you look at that stripe, we were able to lift basically 100% of that color out of that little stripe. Down below it, you have Hansa Yellow Medium, which is a low staining color. And you're able to pick up about probably about 90% of that color, and it just kind of leaves a little bit of a glow behind. And then when you go down to Indanthrone Blue, that is a medium staining color. And this is really where you got to start paying attention, or at least thinking about, am I going to be using any sort of lifting technique here, where you want to make sure that you're able to subtract color. So with Indanthrone Blue, the color only lifts literally about 50%. And then down below here, you have carmine, and dropping carmine or the staining ability of carmine, it's super high. So this is no different than spilling red wine on white carpet. So once that sucker goes down, you're not going to be able to lift this thing back up. So all of that staining is helpful for you with your techniques and whether and how much it allows you to lift or not. All right, granulation. So we tell you in our color charts which colors granulate and which ones don't. So just in case those of you forgot, it's this textured appearance. This is granulation. So we tell you which colors granulate and which ones don't. And then transparency. So transparency is really a big deal. So why is it important to understand transparency? Well, basically what having an understanding of transparency does is that it gives you an idea of how that color is going to react with other colors. So let me ask you all this. What happens when you blend a transparent color with an opaque color? Which color is going to be most dominant?
The opaque.
Absolutely. So the second you introduce an opaque color to a transparent color, all the transparent qualities are gone. So basically, having an understanding of that is going to be a predictor of how those colors are going to work together. So we have a circle system where if you have an open circle, that means that color is fully transparent. If you have a half circle, that means that color is semi-transparent. And any darkened circle means that that color is fully opaque. All right. And the last thing, if you see a P symbol on any of our colors or any of our tubes, that means that color is a Primatech color. So that means that that particular color derives from a mineral. All right. Here's just kind of a look at transparency and how that kind of translates. So if you look at the top here with quinacridone burnt orange, you see it's very prevalent, of course, on white paper, but when you paint it over a black background, you really don't see it at all. And that's because the black is actually shining through the paint. The next color is permanent red, and that's a semi-transparent color. And you're able to see, you know, probably about 40 to 50% of the color. And then down below that is cobalt green, and cobalt green is a fully opaque color, and where you can see a fair amount of green on the black. So cobalt green is a opaque color. So this is just kind of okay, how does that translate? What does that look like? Okay, so I always like asking questions to see if people understand our color chart because I think it's that important. So let me ask you all this. What's the first piece of information that we give you here?
The color.
True, but what about the information below the color name?
Okay, then it's a 15 milliliter tube.
5 mil. Watercolor stick and a half pan. So that shows you what the color is available in. What's that number 1 symbol or that Roman numeral 1 symbol?
Is that the light fastness?
That is correct. That is the light fastness of the color. And what about the number 3?
Anybody?
No, not the series, Michelle. No. It's the staining ability. So ultramarine blue is a medium staining color. So that's what the number 3 means. How about the Y?
Wow.
That tells you that the color granulates. So Y means yes, the color granulates.
Yes.
And then that open circle means that the color is transparent.
Transparent.
And then down below, you see the PB29. That is actually the pigment information. So P stands for pigment, and then the second letter is always going to mean the color family in which it comes from. So in this case, it's B, so that means it comes from the blue color family. And the 29 means that it's the 29th shade of blue. It's kind of the international reference number.
Well, quite a few people would like the chart, and our IT person suggests that if you would like a chart, please email me at plein air, PLEINAIR at pwsociety.org.
Yep. Go ahead and copy that email address in the chat right into your email address, and then you're all ready to go.
Yeah, pwcsociety.org, and I'll just type that in here in the comments.
All right, just quickly, just talk through 1 or 2 other things that Daniel Smith makes. We also make watercolor ground. Those of you that may not know that. Watercolor ground is a paste that you can literally apply to almost anything, and it replicates the same absorbency and feel as 140-pound watercolor paper. So you can use it on lots of different things like glass and wood and different types. You can even put it on plastic, which is amazing. So what's really cool is that you could use it on wood panels, like Michelle said there. You know, so just a lot of different substrates for which you could paint on. Also, watercolor ground can be used for if you wanted to fix a mistake on your piece, and you could get the titanium watercolor ground and touch up the spots that that you don't like, and then you could go over them again. So watercolor ground can be used on a lot of different surfaces.
Yeah, do you apply that like with a brush
Yep.
directly on?
Yep. So you see, just like just one of those cheapy foam brushes there. I find that those are the best things to apply the ground with. Because number one, it's cheap. You don't want to use your Winsor Newton Series 7 brush for this. It's definitely has kind of a grittiness to it. And the other thing to really understand about the grounds is that even though it may dry and feel dry, you need to let it sit for about 24 hours so that it can cure, so that the absorption is correct when you start to paint over it. So basically, it has sort of a sizing associated with it, and after you let it sit for 24 hours, it limits the depth of how far down the paint can actually absorb. So similar to a way a watercolor paper would work. So fun stuff. It does come in different colors. Yeah, we have it in black, we have it in buff titanium, pearlescent white, iridescent gold. We have a number of different colors. We even have a transparent ground. So if you're talking about doing wood panels, that could be something kind of fun, where you could see the grain of the wood underneath. Okay. We also just recently came out with a line of gouache. Gouache is new for us. It's just starting to get out into the market, and our gouache is made with the exact pigment that we make our watercolors out of. The only difference between our gouache and our watercolor is that we use a ton more pigment in order to make the colors opaque. So gouache is something that we now have that's new, and we have it in 74 colors. All right. Any questions before I wanted to kind of show you some of my favorite colors.
Well, I did want to ask one more question myself.
Sure.
Do you ever use a fixative spray to finish your piece, and instead of putting glass on it?
You know, that's becoming a very popular thing. I've been talking with a number of artists who are actually starting to use cold wax also. So they'll go ahead and they'll use a fixative. It has to be very, very fine. Remember that, because you'll liquefy the paint again if it's not fine enough. But if you can get the fixative to be very fine and you let it set, and then a lot of people are starting to use cold wax over the top rather than use glass. So so that's definitely a trend that's happening within watercolor right now, is to do that versus putting our work under glass. So but there's starting to become lots of people that are publishing about that. You'll start to see it in a lot of the watercolor forums and chat groups.
Yes, I want to try that.
Yeah, I'm very curious. I haven't done it to my work myself yet. I think I'm a little fearful that you know, I'm going to be a little heavy-handed with the fixative.
Sample.
Okay. All right. I'll do this. I'm gonna switch my camera around. There we go. All right. So I'm just going to show you some of my favorite colors. I'm going to start with some of the primitive colors here. This is the color for me that really kind of started it all, and it's the Mayan blue. And what's really interesting about this color is that it didn't come from a mineral. It's more about a process, actually. The Mayans during their time, what they would do to create colors, that they would go ahead and take a particular type of clay that was indigenous to where they lived, and then they would add things to that clay in order to make it have color. So in this case, they would take that clay and then mix it with indigo, and it created this color, what that we call Mayan blue. And it's just really just kind of a deep and beautiful granulating blue. It's one of my favorites. It's kind of the color that started it all for me, and really being a believer in Daniel Smith.
Yeah, it's really rich.
It's very rich. You know, and the one thing that you know, people that haven't used our colors before, I always tell them, it's just like very concentrated. Yes, you know, we may be kind of on the upper end in terms of price, but our colors are so rich and concentrated that that, you know, those tubes will actually go quite a long way. All right. Favorite green is green apatite. So this is kind of my go-to green when I'm doing foliage and things like that, or grass. And it's just so really lush, and actually I think it's actually a very versatile color. Oops, a little too much blue. Let's see, there we go. But it's another one of those really rich potent colors, that when you hit it with a lot of water, you can actually get a lot of different variants in terms of the values that you can get with it. And I mentioned that, you know, secret sauce is kind of my favorite, is one of my favorite colors. So I'll go over and get my quinacridone gold. It's right here. And what I like to do is I like to take quinacridone gold, and it's more of an accent color for me. So what I'll do is I'll take it and pick up just a little bit, and then I'll come over here and then I'll add it, and then I can make all sorts of different and beautiful types of colors for foliage.
Was that green apatite?
That was green apatite, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Yeah, and all of our quinacridone colors are super, super, super strong. So they immediately want to take over whatever you blend it with. So if you do use that, you know, just remember to take some time and work with it first before you go straight to a piece, so that you can kind of understand better about how the color actually interacts with other pigments that are not quinacridones. Okay, this is bloodstone. I'm gonna put that right there. So this is bloodstone. Bloodstone is also a really fun color. Make sure to get my brush clean. Because this is another super granulating color that I think is really a lot of fun. Kind of has a reddish brown appearance to it.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the granulation starting to set up there.
Makes a nice tree trunk hue.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Sleeping Beauty turquoise. This might be my my favorite of kind of my cooler turquoise. I kind of slot them. My mind kind of splits between you know, more traditional blues like ultramarine and French, and even to me, Mayan blue kind of fits into that. And then you have these turquoise colors, and this is really one of my favorites because it's really versatile because you can use it with a lot of different things. It could be desert scenery. It could be it could even be skies. But Sleeping Beauty turquoise is beautiful.
Mm.
So what's really interesting about Sleeping Beauty turquoise is that it comes from the Sleeping Beauty mine in Arizona, and in 2006 that mine flooded, and they're no longer able to get turquoise out of that mine. So we are operating on a finite amount of Sleeping Beauty turquoise. So once it's gone, it's probably going to be gone.
Mm. Add that to the list.
All right. Let's look at some of our others here. So for those of you that like florals, let me show this color to you. This is quinacridone lilac. I know that you know, some of the reds, like we were talking about with the alizarin crimson and opera pink, we know those to be fugitive. So this quinacridone lilac color is very bright, but at the same time, it's very light fast, and it's actually a really beautiful color.
Quinacridone lilac.
Mm-hmm. Pretty. All right. Well, we're a couple minutes here. Does anybody have any more questions? I want to make sure that I do my best to answer everybody's question.
It doesn't look like it.
All right. Very good. Well, I just wanted to take a minute and say thank you to you all, and Beth, thank you so much for reaching out to me all those months ago and
Yes.
getting this set up. I'm really happy we were able to make it happen, and thank you all for all of you for your support of Daniel Smith, and feel free to reach out to Beth if you have any more questions. She'll send them my way. And we'll hopefully we'll do this again.
Yeah, Scott, thank you so much. Hope the sun shines your way and dries California out. And
Yeah, we definitely need it. That's for sure.
I'll have to put my order together for some new paint now. Thank you. It was great.
Very good. Well, thank you all. I hope you have a great evening, and we'll see you all soon.